They blocked her path with a single glance. "This isn't your place," the agent sneered, his words cutting through the terminal's hum. She stood firm, her first-class pass 1A confirmed, rightful brushed aside like dust. "Step back," he ordered as security closed in. Moments later, a black woman was pushed out, silenced, while others glided past unchecked. But they didn't know she held power they couldn't fathom, and their world was about to unravel. But what no one at that gate realized, not the staff, not the passengers watching, not even the smug supervisor giving the order, was that the woman they just tried to humiliate wasn't just any traveler. She owned more of their future than their CEO ever would. And now, their downfall was already in motion. Think this is just another discrimination story? Watch closely. This isn't about a boarding pass. It's about who holds the real power. What would you do in her place? Comment below and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if you believe some lines should never be crossed, hit that subscribe, because you won't believe how this ends. It was a kind of morning that usually promised efficiency. 6:15 a.m., crisp air outside LaGuardia, soft fluorescent lights humming over a terminal still shaking off sleep. Business travelers moved like clockwork through the glass doors of Terminal C, their luggage gliding, coats tailored, shoes polished to the rhythm of practiced departures. Among them was Danielle Monroe, dressed in understated black, a structured wool coat and slim briefcase in hand, calm but focused. Her flight to Zurich was scheduled to depart at 8:10, and, as someone who'd crossed more international time zones than most of the staff she would encounter today, the airport was no longer a novelty. It was a corridor of transactions, checkpoints, codes, and clearances. But this morning, from the moment she approached the first-class counter, something was off. The employee behind the kiosk didn't greet her. He didn't scan her name or request her documentation. He simply glanced up, registered the color of her skin, and gestured left. Economy check-ins that way? Danielle blinked once, unsure she heard correctly. "I'm flying first class," she replied, measured and neutral, holding up her digital pass to Zurich. The man didn't look at the screen. He kept his arm outstretched, eyes already shifting to the person behind her. "Left lane, ma'am." Danielle didn't move. "This is my lane," she said. There was no confrontation in her tone, only fact. The man's jaw tightened. "Please step aside." Danielle paused, shifted her weight. A man in a light blazer approached the counter beside her. White, mid-40s, no luggage besides a leather duffel. The attendant greeted him without hesitation, scanned his pass, and asked if he wanted still or sparkling water while he waited. Danielle watched, expression unreadable. She didn't argue further. She stepped back, circled to the side, and approached the premium member kiosk herself. There, another agent finally took her boarding pass, scanned it, and said, "Oh, you're in 1A. That's a nice seat." No apology, no acknowledgement of the dismissal she'd just endured, just small talk. Danielle didn't respond. She took her printed ticket and walked toward security. The TSA lanes split into two, general boarding and TSA pre-check and priority access. Danielle, who held global entry and a Nexus clearance pass issued through international government programs, moved toward the right. The agent standing at the checkpoint was young, polite in that bland, processed way most federal screeners are trained to be. He scanned her boarding pass, looked at her ID, then paused. "You've been randomly selected for standard screening," he said. Danielle glanced at the blinking green light on the scanner. "That doesn't make sense. I'm TSA pre-check and global entry approved," he shrugged. "System must have kicked out." She turned her head just slightly, watching the next passenger, a white woman in business heels and a Canada Goose jacket, walk through the same lane without so much as a glance at her documents, then another. Then a man in a Patriots cap. No random checks, just clean passage. Danielle was led to the general screening line, where her bag was pulled for inspection again. The agent conducting the search was slow, methodical, but not careful. He unzipped her laptop case, pulled out her tablet, her backup charger, 2 sets of sealed documents labeled Confidential, Horizon Capital, and flipped through one of the folders without gloves. "You work in finance?" he asked casually. Danielle didn't answer. "You got a lot of paper for someone going digital." "That's because I manage things most people don't see," she said flatly. He smirked. Sure you do. A supervisor passed by, didn't stop. A fellow traveler stared but said nothing. Danielle reassembled her belongings, repacked them herself, and walked through without another word. On the other side of security, she reached the lounge elevator. A sign above the reader said, Havnire First Class plus Platinum Only. Danielle tapped her pass. The screen blinked red. The receptionist frowned. This says you're not cleared for lounge access. Danielle leaned in. Check again. You'll need to speak to guest services, the receptionist said, already looking past her to the next person. Danielle didn't move. She pulled up the purchase receipt on her phone, dated and verified. The woman behind the counter scanned it, then hesitated. It must be a system glitch. I'll override it. The override took 3 tries. Inside the lounge, Danielle sat by the window with her tablet, back straight, eyes calm, breath even. She had traveled through 8 countries this year alone. She had cleared diplomatic screening in Brussels, keynote speaker access in Singapore, private gates in Doha. But this treatment was only found home, not in the scans, not in the algorithms, but in the glances, in the hands that hesitate to help, in the invisible signs that say, you don't belong here. Not really. She sipped her water, refreshed the Zurich weather tab on her screen, and waited for the next line they'd try to move her out of. Danielle Monroe stepped away from the gate counter with a controlled exhale, the taste of humiliation still fresh in her throat. The gate was now sealed, the door closed, and her name, once printed in digital clarity on the overhead manifest, had vanished like vapor. It was 7:03 EMIT. She hadn't missed her flight had discarded her. With the jet bridge sealed and no other passengers around, Danielle made her way to the nearest self-service kiosk, determined to reissue her boarding pass and force the system to acknowledge her rightful place. She tapped in her confirmation number, last name, and security credentials. The screen blinked once, then printed a boarding pass. She snatched it quickly. Her eyes fell to the seat number. 32B, economy, a middle seat. Her stomach twisted. She tapped again. The kiosk only showed seating assigned at a gate. She turned her head toward the service desk, but no one was there. Trent was gone. The other gate attendants were rotating shifts. Nobody recognized her anymore. She was just another boarding pass problem, not a passenger with a reservation in the premium cabin. Danielle stepped back from the machine, pulse rising. The boarding pass in her hand crumpled slightly under her grip. This wasn't an error. It was surgical. A quiet reclassification, first class to economy, priority to invisible. She found a seating map on the wall and confirmed that 32B was near the back, between the lavatories, part of the overflow zone the airline rarely spoke about but frequently exploited. That seat had been free because no one wanted it, and now it had been assigned to her deliberately. She clenched her jaw, marched over to the counter near the lounge corridor, and requested a customer liaison. Ma'am, we'll escalate this for you, the new agent said without lifting her eyes from a screen. I can file a tech report, but unfortunately our manual override system is limited once the manifest is locked. Danielle narrowed her eyes. Unlock it. The agent blinked, clearly unprepared for resistance. We don't have that kind of access. Then find someone who does. The woman hesitated, glanced over her shoulder, then scribbled a phone number on a slip of receipt paper and passed it across the desk. You can call guest relations and lodge a formal complaint. Danielle didn't pick it up. I'm not calling anyone. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere until this gets corrected. She walked away before the agent could answer, heading straight for the airline lounge reserved for premier travelers. At the lounge entrance, the scanner beeped twice, then read. The receptionist looked up, apologetic. It looks like you've been reclassified to main cabin, Ms. Monroe. Lounge access isn't included. Danielle's eyebrows barely lifted. Check again? The woman tapped a few more times, then shook her head. I'm sorry, it updated 15 minutes ago. Danielle didn't respond. She turned away slowly, pretending she wasn't burning. Instead of sitting, she went to the dining corner of the terminal, the signature eatery known for pre-flight plated meals served to first-class travelers with dietary restrictions. She had submitted her meal preference 4 days ago. Grilled vegetables, lemon rice, no dairy, no gluten, no added sodium. It wasn't luxury. It was medical. an autoimmune disorder necessity. When she reached the counter, the host scanned her new boarding pass and hesitated. "I'm sorry, but you're not listed on the catering sheet anymore." Danielle's expression didn't flicker. "I was listed 4 hours ago." The woman gestured helplessly. "Maybe speak to the concierge desk." Behind her, a man with a thick accent and business attire requested a vegan keto platter. The host nodded and handed it over. Danielle stepped closer. "That's the meal I ordered." The host frowned. "I'm sorry, ma'am, that was specially requested by another passenger." Danielle turned and walked away. No food, no seat, no access, and still no explanation. This wasn't about capacity, it wasn't about policy. It was a system flexing its muscle in all the invisible ways, by removing small comforts, closing off routes, removing one piece of credibility at a time until she no longer resembled the person who bought the ticket, only the one they expected to quietly disappear. But Danielle wasn't built for quiet disappearance. She found an empty bench, placed her bag beside her, and pulled out her phone. She didn't make a call yet. She was no longer being managed, she was being isolated. Her body remained still, but her mind pulsed with sharp, restrained fire. She needed to make a decision soon: escalate and risk being painted as hostile, or wait for the next move in this quiet war they were waging with smiles and screens. She opted for vigilance. And vigilance paid off. From the corner of her eye, she spotted one of the male security officers who had been watching her earlier, walking briskly toward a row. His posture was rehearsed, confident, like a man trained to de-escalate by force if necessary. He stopped just 2 feet away, adjusted his badge as if to remind her who he represented, then leaned slightly forward. "Ms. Monroe," he said, in a tone meant to sound casual but landed sharp. "We've received a report about your carry-on." Danielle blinked, unmoved. What kind of report? Apparently the dimensions exceeded regulation. It was flagged at the gate. "We've routed it through checked luggage as a precaution." She raised an eyebrow. "That's not how this works. That bag cleared security." "It was with me the entire time," he shrugged. "Sometimes baggage handlers make quick decisions to keep boarding smooth. It's already been tagged and sent down." "You don't even know which flight I'm on," she replied. "How do you know where it went?" He hesitated just long enough. "We're doing what's in the best interest of all passengers." Danielle turned away before she said something she couldn't retract. Her fingers curled around the handle of her phone, but she didn't dial. She stood, slow and deliberate, and began walking toward the main security checkpoint. Not because she expected to find her bag, but because standing still was starting to feel like surrender. The checkpoint hadn't changed since she passed through it hours earlier, except now the mood around her shifted. When she stepped back into view, one of the TSA staff raised an eyebrow, then approached, as if she'd tripped an invisible alarm. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice clipped. "My name is Danielle Monroe," she answered, measured. "A staff member told me my carry-on was taken from me for being oversized. I'm trying to confirm where it is." The man gave her a long once-over, as if assessing whether she deserved a real answer. "Did you get a tag?" "No." "Then there's no way to trace it." She didn't respond. He turned and walked back behind the partition. 2 other agents whispered something to each other and glanced over. Danielle took a breath, turned on her heel, and headed toward the claims desk near the service corridor. She didn't get far. A voice, young, female, sharp, called out behind her. "Miss Monroe." She stopped, pivoted slowly. A woman in a crisp Haven Air uniform stepped forward, holding a tablet flanked by another employee holding a zippered pouch. "We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding one of the items in your possession earlier." Danielle narrowed her eyes. "What item?" "A wristwatch, Patek Philippe platinum casing. The serial number on the inside doesn't match our merchandise database." Danielle stiffened. "Your what?" "We've had recent reports of counterfeit luxury items being smuggled through major airport hubs. As per internal audit protocol, we're required to verify authenticity if an item draws attention." "Draws attention from whom?" "From staff." Danielle stepped forward, quiet but ice cold. "Are you accusing me of theft?" "We're not accusing you of anything," the woman said quickly. "We're simply verifying the source." "You don't get to verify what's mine," Danielle answered. "You don't have jurisdiction. That watch is personal property, documented, insured, and none of your business." The woman hesitated. The man beside her stepped forward holding the pouch. "We're asking you to open this in our presence." "No. Then we'll need to escalate to security." "Do it!" Danielle snapped. "Escalate." The man blinked. The woman shifted awkwardly. Neither moved, neither expected her to refuse. People nearby began watching. A man on a laptop angled his screen to peek. Two teenagers whispered behind a magazine. Danielle reached for the pouch herself, opened it and retrieved the watch, holding it between two fingers. "Here," she said, "since you're so interested." She extended it toward the woman, not as an offering but as a demonstration. Serial numbers engraved inside, and if you knew anything about watches at this level, you'd know what that means. The woman hesitated, took a step closer, then stopped. "We'll log this as resolved," she said softly. Danielle returned the watch to her bag. "Don't log anything," she replied. "Log your apologies." The watch confrontation was over, but the tension they'd planted followed her like a static charge in the air. She no longer walked as a traveler, but as a threat that had not yet been contained. The employees who watched her now did so with barely masked caution, like her presence disrupted an algorithm they hadn't been trained to override. She made her way back to gate C12, her boarding pass still reduced to 32B, the memory of her assigned seat 1A now a quiet insult printed in invisible ink. The seating area near the gate had begun to fill with travelers, some stretched out on chairs, some balancing laptops on knees, others charging phones in the few remaining wall sockets. Danielle scanned the room, selected a corner seat near an outlet, and moved to it. She had business to salvage. She needed her device powered if she was going to begin rerouting the rest of her day. She sat, plugged in her charger, and placed her phone on the armrest. A minute passed, then two. She opened her calendar, but before she could finish reading her itinerary, a low voice interrupted her. "Ma'am," a young male ground staff worker said from behind her, "I'm gonna have to ask you to move." Danielle turned her head slowly. "Excuse me?" "That seat's marked for priority business travelers." She looked at the outlet, then the wall, then the empty seat beside her. "I am a business traveler. Not according to the manifest," he said. "This section's reserved." "There's no signage," she noted. "There's no rope. There's no posted restriction." "We've had internal updates," she smiled, brittle and cold. "Is that your explanation?" He blinked. "I'm just doing what my lead told me." She stood, unplugged her charger slowly, and let the silence between them drag an extra beat too long. People nearby looked up. She didn't speak again. She walked away without permission, settling in a row farther from the gate, where the only outlet was broken and the armrest was sticky. The move wasn't about power, it was about position. She didn't bother opening her laptop again. Not here, not now. Instead, she rose and walked toward the first-class lounge. She had passed it earlier and noted its glass facade, the warmth of its lighting, the cluster of leather chairs and baristas in tailored vests. As she approached, her steps slowed. A row of polished shelves near the entrance displayed travel magazines and industry journals. She reached for one, an aerospace quarterly with a woman on the cover she recognized. Not herself, of course, but someone who had once worked under her, now a rising star in aviation analytics. Danielle held the magazine carefully, not flipping it, just letting the name on the front settle in her palm. "Ma'am?" said a voice beside her, lower, a bit awkward. She turned to face a tall man in a dark blazer, wearing a name tag that read Client Relations. "That publication is for Platinum members only," he said, tilting his chin toward the magazine. Danielle's gaze didn't move. "I'm first class. Platinum is above that. My boarding class doesn't matter," she said, finally looking at him. "My name should—" "I'm afraid the policy is clear," he said, reaching out. She handed him the magazine without breaking eye contact. He took it, turned, and slid it back onto the shelf, as if he were removing a weapon from a child. Danielle didn't speak. She stepped around him and entered the lounge. Inside, she approached the refreshment bar, reaching for a glass of still water infused with cucumber. Another staff member intercepted her. "Can I see your lounge credentials?" She handed over her boarding pass. The woman scanned it, then frowned. "Your access has been revoked, ma'am. I'm sorry." Danielle blinked. "Revoked? It appears your ticket has been downgraded. You downgraded me. I didn't request this." We don't have discretion over ticketing. Danielle took a breath. You have discretion over who you humiliate, and you've used it well. The woman said nothing. Danielle turned around and exited the lounge without another word. The walls felt closer now, the air thicker. It wasn't just isolation, they were beginning to erase her access to space, not just physically but symbolically. She wasn't being delayed, she was being disqualified from proximity, from status, from visibility. She stepped back into the main hall, blinking against the overhead fluorescence. She was no longer Danielle Monroe, the woman on government panels and investor calls. She was the black woman who had asked for too much, stood too long, demanded what was hers too clearly. Danielle didn't look away when her eyes met Trent's, standing across the terminal near a kiosk, arms folded, gaze cold and assured, like a man observing a machine he'd set in motion, working exactly as he'd intended. He didn't move, didn't signal, didn't acknowledge her beyond that long, calculated stare. But the message was unmistakable. She wasn't part of this terminal anymore. She was an anomaly that needed purging. Danielle turned her back to him without hesitation and walked toward the seating near her downgraded gate, still listed as a standby passenger for a flight she'd never agreed to change. The gate screen now showed on time. A woman nearby pushed her suitcase too hard and it toppled sideways, blocking the aisle between two rows of seats. Danielle, who had just sat down after circling the airport 3 times that morning, instinctively stood up and leaned to lift the bag out of the way. It was heavy, metal-framed, full. She struggled for a second, but no one moved to help. Not the 2 younger men scrolling on their phones in the seat beside her, not the older woman sipping coffee while watching through aviators, and certainly not the airport staff member standing 2 steps away in a black vest with a Haven Air pin. Danielle turned to him, eyes firm but polite. "Could you give me a hand with this?" she asked. The staff member blinked, turned his head to the side, then walked away without saying a word, just walked off, like she'd spoken a language he didn't recognize. Danielle inhaled sharply and finished lifting the bag herself, setting it upright beside a support beam. The woman who had dropped it said nothing, just nodded, distracted, as if Danielle's act had simply corrected a minor inconvenience. Danielle sat back down and wiped her palm against her slacks. Her heart beat slower now, but heavier. She could feel her breath echoing deeper in her chest. The moment hadn't been violent, it hadn't even been loud, but it had been public, deliberate, and silent in the most dangerous way. Minutes passed. A cart rolled through with complimentary refreshments. The employee pushing it, a young man with neat hair and a fake smile, offered juice boxes, snack bars, and water bottles to those near the gate. He skipped Danielle completely. She waited as he circled back. She raised a hand slightly. "Could I get a bottle of water?" she asked plainly. The cart slowed, then stopped. The employee looked down at the list on his clipboard, then back at her. "What's your name?" "Danielle Monroe." He checked the manifest, frowned slightly. "You're not on the registered priority list." "Water isn't a priority item," she replied. "It's basic hospitality." "We've had a few issues with disruptive passengers recently," he said quietly, as if confiding something unpleasant. "Management asked us to be selective." Danielle's eyes narrowed, not in surprise, but in recognition. She knew what was happening. "Are you suggesting I've been disruptive?" "I didn't say that," he answered quickly, "just following instructions." "Whose instructions?" He didn't answer. Instead, he offered a tight, practiced smile and pushed the cart forward, resuming his route. Danielle stared after him, her throat dry, not from thirst but from the erosion of dignity. Across from her, a middle-aged man in cargo shorts and sandals leaned back in his chair and muttered, "Just loud enough." "Always a problem, huh?" His wife nudged him, gently, but didn't scold. Danielle heard it. Everyone heard it. No one said anything. Her phone vibrated in her lap. A message from her personal assistant lit up the screen. "Zurich prep deck finalized. PDF and print copies confirmed. Hotel rebooked. We're good to go on your arrival." Danielle stared at the message for a long second before locking the screen again. She was nowhere near arrival. She wasn't even near a gate that recognized her. She had slipped through a crack so precise it had been carved specifically for her. The seat, the bag, the watch, the water, the silence. And now the insinuation, the whispers, the faint hum of a new label attaching to her that no one would say aloud but everyone understood. Difficult, uncooperative, troublemaker. A person whose presence caused friction not because of anything she said, but because she refused to disappear. She stood up slowly, walked toward the small vending machine near the window, and inserted her card. Declined. She tried again. Declined. She tried the bottle of water in the cooler beside the gate agent's station. "This is only for active first-class passengers," the clerk said blandly. Danielle didn't argue. She turned away. She walked past rows of passengers who now glanced at her like she was a puzzle they couldn't solve, but didn't want to touch. The kind of presence that unsettled because it stood where it wasn't expected to stand. She didn't look angry. She didn't look broken. But she looked permanent, like she wasn't leaving. A few keystrokes followed, quiet and swift. Then came the whisper, barely audible but spoken with conviction. "Tag her as special attention, code 37C. History of defiance, flag for behavior." Danielle didn't hear it, but she felt the shift. She saw it in how the energy around her changed, how every glance carried a flicker of suspicion, how no one spoke to her without first scanning her face, then the monitor, then back again, like she had become a potential liability. The label had been attached now, somewhere in the digital fabric that governed her journey. Not a passenger, a problem. Back at the desk, Trent leaned forward and murmured something into the earpiece of his supervisor. The man nodded once, then tapped into the internal system, his screen filling with Danielle's itinerary and profile. A red note appeared beside her name: priority suppression, monitor interaction, defer resolution, limit escalation channels. From that moment forward, any employee scanning her name would see the same digital scar. She had been rewritten in the system, not as a customer to be helped, but as a complication to be managed, a piece of noise to minimize. Danielle, unaware of the technical maneuvering happening in real time, stood and walked to the nearest information desk. Her goal was simple: to track down her original carry-on bag that had been taken earlier under the pretense of non-compliance. She approached the counter, calm but clear. "I need to trace a bag that was pulled from me without check-in authorization," she said. "It was never tagged, no sticker, no claim number. I need it recovered immediately." The woman behind the desk raised an eyebrow, scanned Danielle's boarding pass, and frowned slightly. "It says here the bag is already in transit to the aircraft cargo bay," she said without looking up. "There's nothing more we can do." Danielle narrowed her eyes. "Transit to which aircraft? I've been bumped from a flight I paid for. I haven't been boarded. What flight is my luggage being attached to?" The woman hesitated, then clicked through a few more screens. "The system doesn't show that information." Danielle's voice sharpened. "Then the system is broken. Find someone who can tell me exactly where that bag is." Behind the desk, another employee, a man in his mid-30s with thinning hair and a clipped tone, cut in. "If the bag isn't secured under a confirmed seat, it's treated as a discretionary hold." Danielle blinked. "Meaning?" "Meaning it may not be loaded, it may be rerouted to claims, or it may be returned to origin if left unresolved." Danielle's heart thudded once, slow and low. "That bag is private contracts, sensitive materials, electronics, and documents not stored digitally. I need it found," the man smirked. "Then maybe you should have packed smarter." The words hit like a slap, not loud but precise. Danielle stepped back, fists clenched, then leveled her voice. "Give me your name." "It's printed right here," he said, tapping his badge, "but you can address all complaints through guest services, not through me." She stared at him for 3 long seconds, committing his name to memory, then turned and walked away, breath tight in her lungs. She returned to the baggage claim department, where a younger staffer behind the counter scanned her boarding number and motioned to a side door. "We had something sent back from gate 17. Might be yours," he said. Danielle followed a handler into a small room behind the office, where various untagged or misrouted items sat in plastic bins or on metal racks. Near the back, sitting alone on the floor beside a mop bucket, was her bag. The sleek black leather was streaked with dirt, the front pocket had been left unzipped, and one corner of the case looked as if it had been dragged, not rolled. Danielle dropped to her knees and checked inside. The tablet was missing, 2 folders had been bent, the paper edges damp. Her watch box had been opened, the velvet lining inside was soaked and warped. She stood slowly, still holding the handle of the bag, and turned to the handler. "How did this get here?" he shrugged. "Came in with a code tag, probably misread." Danielle didn't argue. She wheeled the bag behind her in silence, gripping the handle so hard her fingers ached. The item was returned, but the damage was complete. Back outside, she approached a new kiosk to document a formal damage report, but when she scanned her boarding pass again, the screen flickered and froze. The message that appeared was not standard. "This profile has been flagged. Please contact airline representative." She stood motionless for several seconds, the noise of the terminal swirling around her. She had been silenced digitally, locked out of even basic complaint protocols. The entire system, monitors, terminals, internal memos, was no longer a tool for resolution. It had become a mechanism of exclusion, and she wasn't standing outside of it, she was buried beneath it. Across the hall, a voice she had come to recognize rose again, light and dismissive. Trent Maxwell, smiling as he escorted another white couple into the premium lounge, his hand motioning like a maitre d' at a private club. He caught Danielle's gaze mid-motion, then looked past her deliberately, like she was air. As she approached the TSA checkpoint again, the same one she'd cleared nearly 3 hours earlier without incident, a different uniformed agent flagged her. He was short, well-built, and overly cheerful in a way that felt aggressively scripted. "Ma'am," he said, stepping into her path, "we'll need to conduct a secondary screening, just a quick random check." Danielle stopped, her hand still on her bag handle. "I've already been through." "This is an additional protocol," he replied. "Random assignment." "Nothing about what's happened today has been random," she said flatly. "I'm sure this won't be either." He didn't smile. Instead, he motioned toward a table set up near the side corridor, where 2 other TSA agents, both female, stood waiting with latex gloves already pulled on. Danielle hesitated, then walked over with a controlled pace, like a queen stepping into enemy territory, not out of fear, but necessity. They asked her to raise her arms. She did. The wand passed over her body without issue, no beeps, no buzzes. Then came the pat down. One of the agents, a younger woman with a sharp ponytail and rigid posture, began at her shoulders and moved down her arms. So far, routine. Then the search slowed as she reached Danielle's waist. The agent's hands pressed in, fingers firm, tracing the inside seam of her pants longer than required. Danielle flinched. "That's not standard," she said. The agent didn't respond. Instead, she bent slightly, continuing the search around Danielle's inner thigh, brushing too far in, lingering. Danielle stepped back instinctively. "Enough," she said, her voice cracking but steady. "That's not a pat-down, that's harassment." The agent looked up, not defensive, just dispassionate. "Ma'am, you're delaying the process." "I'm ending the process," Danielle snapped. "You've crossed the line." The supervisor walked over, unconcerned. "Is there a problem?" "Yes," Danielle replied, sharp as glass. "You're manufacturing one." She snatched her bag, zipped what she could, and walked away before anyone had the nerve to stop her. The boarding announcement for the Zurich flight echoed faintly over the terminal speakers. Danielle checked the gate screen. Despite everything, her name was still tied to standby for that downgraded seat in row 32, but she knew they would never actually call her. She wasn't being delayed, she was being erased in real time. Still, she walked toward the gate as they began to call Group 1. She wasn't going to let them rewrite this without showing her face one more time. She stepped into the priority line, her posture straightened, every inch of her presence controlled. Trent was at the gate now, clipboard in hand, smile polished and professional, flanked by 2 younger employees and a pair of airport security officers stationed strategically nearby. As Danielle reached the boarding podium, Trent raised a hand. "I'm sorry, Miss Monroe, your name isn't currently cleared for boarding." "I never canceled my flight," she said, lifting her boarding pass and ID. "I was never rebooked by choice. You took my seat." "You were removed from the first-class manifest due to a boarding conflict," Trent said smoothly. "You're not on the main cabin list, either. There's a hold on your profile." "A hold you placed," Danielle replied, arbitrarily, illegally. "Ma'am," one of the security officers interrupted, stepping closer, "you'll need to return to the seating area until this is resolved." "Resolved," Danielle repeated. "You've locked me out, humiliated me, stripped me of every right as a customer, and now you want me to sit quietly while you finish the job?" The officer didn't respond. He placed a hand gently but purposefully on her shoulder, guiding her back from the boarding lane. "We're asking for cooperation, that's all," he said. Danielle froze. The room froze with her. The touch was light, but it meant everything. The physical contact transformed an already dehumanizing process into something that felt like ownership, like containment. The line behind her shifted as people watched, some pretending not to, others holding phones just low enough to be discreet. Danielle stepped out of the officer's reach without violence, but with precision. "Don't touch me again," she said quietly. The tension hung in the air like an unspoken dare. Trent broke it with a motion to the second officer, who joined the first in boxing Danielle out from the boarding path. "Please escort Ms. Monroe back to concourse seating," he said. "She's been flagged for further review." "Review of what?" she asked, even though she already knew the answer. The answer was nothing, or worse, whatever they needed it to be. Her presence wasn't inconvenient, it was intentional. They needed her humiliated, not just processed. She was pushed gently backward, step by step, as the boarding gate buzzed open for other passengers, people with less baggage, both literal and metaphorical. A woman with a stroller, a man in a tailored coat with an espresso in hand, a teenager with noise-canceling headphones. All passed by her without looking twice. Danielle stood still, the guards beside her like parentheses closing in on a sentence they didn't want finished. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call. She didn't answer it. Not yet, not here. She let it ring out in her pocket as Trent looked back at the manifest screen, tapping something with casual finality. Then, without looking, he spoke over his shoulder toward the officers. "Let's clear the line. We've got a schedule to keep." Danielle turned her head slowly, scanning the terminal, not for escape but for leverage. Her voice would not be heard here, not yet, but her presence wasn't done speaking. She adjusted the collar of her coat, rolled her shoulder beneath the handprint they'd left, and stepped just far enough back to see the entire gate once more. And that was when her phone vibrated again. This time not a call, but a secure notification. She read the name on the screen, and for the first time in hours her eyes sharpened with something other than restraint. She tapped the screen, lifted the phone to her ear, and said 2 words into the receiver. "It's time. It's time," she repeated. The voice on the other end responded quickly, professionally. No small talk, no hesitations. Understood. Activating position. Danielle closed her eyes briefly as if steadying the weight of what came next, then added, "Full withdrawal. Sovereign fund and domestic holdings. Block all ongoing negotiations with Orion. Disengage completely. Effective now." There was a brief pause, confirmation, perhaps an audible nod from the other end. Then the call disconnected. She didn't need to say more. The lever had already been pulled. She lowered the phone, held it at her side, then walked past the 2 security officers without acknowledging them. They didn't stop her. Something in her demeanor had shifted, stillness replaced by sharp motion, silence now filled with a storm humming just below the surface. She moved toward the nearest airline help desk, where a woman in a blazer sat typing behind a counter lined with brochures and dustless laminated signs that said, "We're here to help." Danielle placed a manila folder on the counter, its edge clicking lightly on the surface. "I need you to deliver this to Mr. Leonard Westbrook, VP of International Operations. It's urgent. Confirm delivery." The woman blinked, confused, clearly not used to being addressed like a courier, but Danielle leaned forward. "Tell him the file contains 3 months of internal behavior audits conducted without disclosure at 5 major U.S. terminals, all involving Haven Air personnel and executive oversight." The woman's posture changed instantly. She reached for the folder. Danielle didn't release it. Time-stamped reports, employee IDs, passenger complaints, and digital logs. If he doesn't acknowledge receipt in 15 minutes, it's going public. Then she let go. Across the terminal, Danielle watched as a series of Haven Air executives began to gather near a corner office beside gate D6, their faces taut, phones pressed to ears, steps sharp and erratic. They were being briefed. The storm had reached the control tower. Danielle took her seat again near the window, this time facing the terminal's heart, where every information screen now blinked with boarding updates, gate changes, and one small alert most passengers would miss. Operational delay. Flight 882 to Zurich, standby adjustment under review. It wasn't public yet, but inside the airline's network, red flags were exploding. Somewhere in the digital web, Danielle Monroe's profile was being manually reviewed by someone with clearance higher than Trent's. Someone who had just received a call from an investment office in Zurich, and another from a compliance attorney in D.C., and perhaps even a third from the Department of Transportation, triggered by an automatic cascade clause tied to financial destabilization within their preferred vendors. Trent, unaware of the shift happening above his rank, continued business as usual, still instructing his team to block certain profiles, to shuffle manifest lines, to re-verify priority access that had already been sold and confirmed. He spoke confidently to his staff, but beneath that voice was something new: shortness of breath, the unconscious repetition of phrases, the need to repeat instructions twice. Something was wrong, he felt it, but he didn't know why. Danielle watched as her phone buzzed once more. This time it was a short, encrypted message. Initiated contracts withdrawn, estimated financial loss $615 million, 0 cents over 5 fiscal quarters, Westbrook notified, response pending. She read it, locked the screen, and sat back, her expression unreadable. She wasn't angry anymore. Anger was emotional. This was precision. From her coat pocket she pulled out a slim device, scanned her thumb, and authorized a final relay. A set of summaries prepared weeks in advance, containing legal evaluations, contract violations, and unredacted testimonials from passengers who had undergone similar treatment, some silenced, some compensated into silence. These reports were meant as leverage in case Haven Air ever crossed the line. Today, they hadn't just crossed it, they'd bulldozed it. Danielle tapped a secure contact, legal counsel for the primary equity partner behind Haven Air's Asia-Pacific expansion. The message was simple: pause all negotiations. Primary U.S. stakeholder has disengaged. Reason: discriminatory operational protocol breach. She didn't wait for acknowledgement. The system would handle the collapse from here. On the other side of the glass, beyond the gates, a man in a gray suit exited a private elevator marked Authorized Only. His face was pale, jaw tight, phone gripped so hard the knuckles had gone white. Leonard Westbrook. Danielle recognized him instantly. She had met him once, at a World Trade Ethics conference. He didn't recognize her then, just another woman in a tailored suit asking pointed questions about compliance. But today he spotted her in the concourse and froze. Their eyes met, and in that split second his face fell, not in anger, but in realization. He approached quickly. "Ms. Monroe," he began, but Danielle raised a hand without standing. "You've been briefed." "I have," he replied, breath short. "The materials are comprehensive." "So is the problem," she said. "Systemic, cultural, codified in silence and protocol." "This wasn't approved by executive command," he said. "I believe that," she countered, "but it was sustained, and now it's collapsed. Please, allow us time to investigate fully. You have until the next flight," she said. "After that you won't have a brand left to recover." He looked at her for a long moment, then turned, moving toward a conference room behind frosted glass. Inside, silhouettes formed, a dozen executives scrambling to triage a hemorrhaging institution. Danielle rose. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she answered with one word: proceed. Danielle ended the call without ceremony, her hands steady as she slipped the phone back into her coat pocket. Her movements were devoid of tension now, like a chess player who had delivered the final move before the board had even cleared. Across the concourse, the frosted glass walls of the executive briefing room pulsed with the silhouettes of chaos, figures pacing, gesturing, flipping through documents with a frenzy that had no purpose but to appear busy in the face of an oncoming collapse. Danielle didn't watch them long. She knew the real pressure point wasn't in that room. It was about to be summoned from the floor below. Trent Maxwell still stood at gate C12, issuing calm directives to his team, correcting boarding lists, ignoring whispers of disruption, and failing to notice the absence of momentum in every terminal system around him. His arrogance insulated him, it always had, but that insulation was thinning. The first call came to his radio, crisp and clipped. "Maxwell, Concourse Ops wants you in boardroom B, immediate." Trent frowned, adjusted his earpiece, and responded with a casual, "Copy that," though his tone faltered just enough for his assistant to look up. "Everything good?" she asked. "Routine check-in," he said. smiling without meaning it. "Cover me here." He walked off toward the restricted corridor, unaware that the door he was heading toward had already sealed his fate. Boardroom B was a makeshift crisis control hub that hadn't been used in 3 years, last activated during a bomb threat that shut down half the terminal. Today, it had been reopened for something far more insidious, a reputational bomb that no one had planned for. Inside, the air was tight and stale. 2 regional directors sat on one side of the table. A legal advisor from headquarters, flown in on the 6 a.m. red-eye, sat on the other. In front of them lay a printed dossier marked Confidential, Monroe Investigation Files. Trent walked in with the posture of a man still convinced he held the floor. "What's this about?" he asked, tone still breezy. The woman closest to the head of the table didn't answer with a greeting. She simply lifted the top page of the file, turned it toward him, and spoke evenly. "Do you know who Danielle Monroe is?" Trent gave a half smirk. "Passenger with a chip on her shoulder. Caused a ruckus. We're handling it." The room fell silent. The second director leaned in, voice ice cold. "She's not just a passenger. She's the primary investor behind 3 of our largest institutional contracts. She controls voting shares from Horizon Equity, has veto rights through Nexus Strategic Holdings, and has just pulled $600 million, 0 cents, in joint capital support." Trent blinked. "That's not possible." "It already happened," the man said, 15 minutes ago, and the ripples are bleeding into the DOT, FAA, and 2 international partner boards. "We're fielding press calls," the woman added. "We have reporters at the front doors. We've grounded 2 outgoing flights just to stall optics." "She has you on video, Maxwell," the legal advisor said. "Multiple witnesses. You didn't just discriminate, you coordinated it. You flagged her account, reassigned her seat, deleted her dietary clearance, blocked her at boarding, and greenlit a false alert that removed her from TSA clearance without authorization." Trent stood frozen, all his practiced calm draining into the floor. "I followed protocol," he said finally. "You followed bias," the director snapped, "and you did it systematically. That folder doesn't just include Monroe's case, it contains 24 others. Same profile, same reassignment, same code tags. You created a pattern. You left a trail." The legal advisor slid a white envelope toward him, "And now you're being given 2 options. You'll sign this, your resignation and full liability waiver, or the board will release your name to the media with a full breakdown of your..." Trent stared at the envelope like it was ticking. His fingers didn't move. His mouth parted, then closed again. 30 minutes, the woman said. "After that, we'll assume you prefer option 2. They stood and left him alone. The clock began counting silently on the screen above the digital wall calendar. Trent remained seated, breathing uneven, his skin clammy despite the chill in the room. Outside, the terminal buzzed with movement that no longer responded to his direction. Danielle, seated in the center of it all, stared at nothing, her gaze locked on the floor tiles, like she could see the rot running under the surface of the building. Across the hall, the Haven Media Relations officer stood with a Bluetooth headset in one ear, coordinating camera access, his notes scribbled with phrases like strategic pivot, compassionate statement, and diversity leadership summit. But the real event hadn't happened yet. Not the press release, not the formal suspension, not even the handoff of control to crisis management. That was still coming. Trent stood abruptly, gripping the envelope, then tossing it aside like it burned his skin. His hands ran over his face once, then gripped the sides of the table. He looked at the frosted glass door as if it were a wall. Behind it, his career had already ended. He was just the last one to realize it. He opened his mouth, inhaled, then grabbed his phone and started typing frantically. Outside the room, no one was waiting for his instructions. For the first time in 15 years, Trent Maxwell had nothing to say that mattered. At gate C12, the boarding lane reopened, but this time it wasn't for him to decide who passed through. And at that exact second, the overhead speaker system crackled to life, with a sound that made everyone in the terminal pause mid-step and glance upward. The overhead speaker cracked with static, and then a firm, unfamiliar voice filled the terminal airspace with a kind of clarity that demanded silence. "Attention all passengers. Effective immediately, all Orion Air International flights are suspended for administrative reevaluation. Further updates will be provided at designated service desks." The reaction was instantaneous. Phones were pulled out, conversations exploded into confusion, gate agents froze mid-motion, and the digital screens across Terminal C began to flicker from green to red with delay notices and hold messages. Danielle stood calmly in the middle of it all, not surprised, not smug, simply centered, as if the chaos blooming around her was the natural result of a long equation reaching its conclusion. She had warned them, they had chosen not to listen, and now the sky was closing in. Across town, inside a federal contracting office just blocks from Capitol Hill, the legal counsel for the Department of Transportation faxed a formal letter of cancellation to Orion Air headquarters. The contract, worth $2.1 billion 0 cents over 6 years, had included exclusive military personnel transport, diplomatic secure flights, and infrastructure logistics for 10 allied nations. It was now null. The justification: breach of non-discrimination clauses, active civil rights investigations pending, failure to comply with transparency standards in passenger treatment. In the space of hours, Orion had gone from a pillar of global aviation to a case study in systemic collapse. The market responded before the ink dried. By noon the next day, Orion stock had plummeted 18%, wiping out nearly $900 million 0 cents in shareholder value. Pundits speculated on news networks, trying to rationalize how one passenger, a woman with no entourage, no cameras, no press, had dismantled an entire power structure with a phone call and a folder. But Danielle hadn't needed visibility. She had weaponized precision. She hadn't protested. She had documented. She hadn't screamed. She had struck, clean and irreversible. Meanwhile, in a windowless room on the 3rd floor of Orion's executive wing, a press conference began with no fanfare, no backdrop banners, no branded podium, no applause. The CEO, a man named Bryce Hammond, stood alone in front of a single camera operator, his face pale under harsh ceiling light, his voice tight as he read from the printed statement in his hands. For too long, he began, "We've measured success by scale, not ethics. We believe that tradition excused culture, and that systems would self-correct. We were wrong. Today, we are being held accountable, not by competitors, but by conscience." He paused, looking down, as if searching for the rest of the sentence in the cracks between the words. "We are suspending operations to conduct a full structural overhaul, beginning with leadership resignations and a public audit of our internal processes. We will release data, not just statements, and we will listen." He looked directly into the lens as if he knew exactly who was watching. "To Ms. Danielle Monroe, on behalf of this institution and the damage it inflicted, I offer not an excuse, but recognition. Your refusal to disappear changed us, and it should." When the live feed ended, the camera operator gave no nod. No reporters asked questions. The lights clicked off. Silence filled the room where applause was supposed to be. Back at the terminal, Danielle received the official email confirming her stake divestments had executed in full. Her legal team would be forwarding the whistleblower documents to congressional oversight, while her PR firm had already declined 5 major interviews with national media. She didn't want fame, she wanted function. She packed her tablet back into a new leather bag, a replacement hand delivered by a Nexus Technologies courier 20 minutes prior, and walked quietly toward Gate D1, where a non-Orion airline was preparing to board for Geneva. As she stepped into the jet bridge, a young black woman near the entrance whispered, "Miss Monroe." Danielle turned. The woman smiled shyly. "I watched what happened. I saw you. I work with flight systems, and because of today, I'm staying." Danielle nodded once. No lecture, no mentorship, just acknowledgement. They boarded together. In the months that followed, the industry shifted. Airline review boards issued new federal guidelines on discrimination logging, TSA protocols added third-party accountability officers, and a wave of leadership changes rippled across carriers like a virus of overdue reckoning. Orion Air returned to operations 6 months later, but never fully recovered. Their new slogan, "Clear Skies, Clear Conscience," rang hollow in the shadow of what had occurred. Danielle never flew them again. She didn't need to. Her flight had already changed everything. The end. The story of Danielle Monroe unveils a profound lesson. True power lies not in loud defiance, but in quiet, calculated resilience. Her journey through systemic discrimination at the airport reveals how deeply ingrained biases can strip away dignity, yet it also shows that those who endure such injustices can wield influence far beyond their oppressor's imagination. Danielle's refusal to vanish, her choice to document, strategize, and strike with precision, toppled an institution that thrived on silence. This teaches us that change demands more than anger. It requires clarity, evidence, and unwavering self-worth. No system, no matter how entrenched, is immune to accountability when confronted by someone who knows their value and refuses to be erased. Her victory reminds us to stand firm, to see beyond the moment's humiliation, and to trust that justice, when meticulously crafted, can reshape the world. Danielle didn't just board a flight, she redefined the skies. If this story moved you or made you think, make sure to subscribe for more powerful narratives that challenge injustice and spotlight real change. Which moment hit you the hardest and why? Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know where in the world you're watching from.